Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to take a look at a game by the name of Cosmogenesis. And this is a planet building game. It's designed, I believe, by Yves Tournier, published by Ludo Nova. And in it, players are going to be constructing various solar systems in order to meet a number of objectives to score the most points. The box says that it's for ages 10 and up. I find it to be relatively complex on the rules side of things, even though the actual gameplay is not that complicated. Maybe I would suggest going slightly higher than that. But in any case, the gameplay is in about 60 minutes, which is accurate, I think, for 2 to 4 players. I did a rules explanation for it. It took me about 10 to 15 minutes to go through those rules, so I'll let you take a look at that, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think about the game. So I've laid out here a 2-player setup for Cosmogenesis, and this game goes to 4 players. And it is a game where players are going to be essentially forming planets and constellations of their moons within a set of a galaxy, which is going to be represented by their individual player boards, in order to score points. At the end of the game, there's going to be a scoring where all the points are going to be tallied, and those are going to come from a few things, such as having the best asteroid belt, from having exotic elements in your galaxy, and then from completing objectives on tiles of these 2 types. So the one on my left is a planetary objective. It would require you to have these specific configuration on one of your lines. Essentially, this galaxy is made up of a number of different planets in orbit. If one of the planets, reading across, had the requirements that are met there, you would score the points here at the end of the game, plus you get this instant bonus as soon as you chose to score it. So for example, I'll just show you, this one here has to be a planet that's at least size 3, and it has to have an atmosphere. And then it doesn't matter what's on the first 2 levels of its orbit, but on the 3rd level of orbit, you would need to have another planet that's at least level 1. If you score this, so you get 4 points, plus at the time of scoring it, you would get a asteroid and a comet to add to your asteroid belt. Whereas this player, and I should say players will draft one of these at the start of the game, this player needs to have a gas planet with a ring. I'll explain how planets get a ring in a moment. And then on the 2nd and 3rd levels of their moons, I guess orbits of their moons for that planet, they have to have at least level 2 sized moons. And that would be worth 7 points, plus an additional 1 point if this planet here happened to be purple, and they would get as an instant bonus an asteroid in their asteroid field and a level 1 planet that they could place in orbit or as an anchor for a new line. So, also players are going to score at the end of the game tiles such as this one. So this one here would score you 2 points per comet that you had at the end of the game. Plus, if you have the majority of comets, the most, more than any other player, you get an additional 3 points. Whereas this one, for example, just scores you for gas planets that you have, whether or not they have a ring, 2 points each, 3 points if you have the most within your system. So those are the ways that the game is going to score you. And there's many tiles that have different scorings on them, both for the planets and for the whole galaxy. But what you'll be doing over the course of the game is drafting things to add to your galaxy, and then using asteroids and collisions of impacts with comets to transform the things that are in your galaxy into other things that will meet those requirements. So the game's played over 6 rounds, and up here is a round tracker. And between each round, if any of your planets have the ability to sustain advanced life, there's going to be little mutations. But typically, the rounds are going to involve just 4 placements of workers that you have. Each player is going to have 4 of these pawns. And there are 4 sections of the board. There's essentially a section up here where you could get asteroids or comets. The person who claims this asteroid also gets first player. Down here, the players can, and down here, players could take celestial objects to add to their systems. So, here there are some planets, some are gas, some are rock. Here there are some more gas planets, and there are these exotic objects. If you have these are going to be worth a point for you at the end of the game. Plus, they'll also give you a special action that you can use a certain number of times. You'll place wooden markers on here to indicate how many times you're going to do that, or going to be able to do that. And then finally, the central section here is going to have those end game scoring objectives. So in rounds 1, 3, and 5, you're going to get ones that score for your entire galaxy. So like I just explained. But in rounds 2, 4, and 6, you'll get additional tiles here that will score individual planets and their moons if you meet the requirements of those. So you'll basically be getting 6 of those extra tiles over the course of the game to add to your display here. These will just plug in over here. And these planetary ones you keep secret from other players, and only when you choose to use your special action to score it do you place it alongside the planet that has qualified or has met the requirements that are on that tile, and that it'll just stay there until the end of the game when it will score. So that is essentially how you're going to play or score the game, and how you're going to play it. Like I said, it's really a bit of a worker placement game, but it's really more of, I'd say, a drafting game where players are going to be able to draft one thing from each of the 4 sections each round, and then augment their drafting action with a special action. The game comes with a player aid that shows you just how many particular options you have on your turn, and this will make a lot of sense, I think, to people who are well versed in planetary science. For me, who is not really a science person, I had to keep referring back to this during the course of the game. But generally speaking, the turn's divided into 2 sections. The first section of your turn is mandatory. You're going to just draft something from that board by placing one of your areas or one of your tokens into a section. So, like for example, this player here, they want to make a planet that has a level, or they want to set up a planet that has a level 3 weight with a moon on it. So they might choose to place here, take this level 3 planet, add it to their system. You're always going to build your system from the bottom up, filling in one slot at a time. I should note that only the first 3 areas, the areas that are closest to your sun, are capable of supporting advanced life. After that, they could only support bacteria. So if you're trying to grow life, which is going to be one of the things that's going to score you points at the end of the game, you'll have to make sure you're doing it down here. So the player who did that, they would choose to add it as a moon, or as a planet, which then could support moons. So then if you're going to ever add moons, you'll put them in here from left to right. So your first thing that you put as a moon would go in the first space, and the second one, and so on. And like I said, on these scoring tiles, you'll have to have sometimes specific things in specific orbits in order to meet these requirements. So if a player ever takes a planet or a gas planet, let's say this player over here wants a gas planet, so maybe they would go here and take this gas planet and put this here. That's going to serve as an anchor for any moons. And each of these planets, or whether they're gas or rock, can support up to 3 moons. I should note that these gas planets are considered bigger than any of their moons, so they could hold moons here of any size. Although a gas planet could never serve as a moon, that's important to know. But this one here, like I noted, is a level 3 one, so that can only support moons of level 1 or level 2. So the laws of gravity would not allow this to have something its own size or bigger orbiting it. So as you're placing these out, you have to make sure that you're not putting here anything that's larger than level 2. So that's your first option on your turn. The second thing is, let's say this player wanted to... So this player could not take any of these 2 objects, I should note. The worker placement is such that you'll go to each of these sections once. And so this player, having gone here, could not go here again. What they could do is maybe they just go up here, and they could take one of these 2 objects. So there's a comet, and then there is an asteroid. So let's say they take this asteroid. It would get added to their asteroid belt. By taking the asteroid there, they'd lock in first player, and then they would be able to do what are the secondary actions. So that's the second part of your turn. There are all these secondary actions that are listed here. And I guess I'll try to explain them all. But you can see here, there's, your turn structure is you do your primary action, which is drafting from the board. You do your secondary action, which is potentially spending an asteroid or a comet in the most cases, or it could be completing an objective. And then you have the option to do an exotic action object. You could use one or more of those after your main action. So if this player had this down here, when you acquire it, you put discs on it equal to the number of special circle icons down here. So this would get 2. You could use this once per round, spending one of those discs off of it to, for example, here, generate an asteroid. So that would be another thing that you could do on your turn. But that's essentially the turn structure. It's going to be take something and then manipulate things. So just to explain how these work. So when you take, it tells you on this player aid, which is very helpful, if you take a terrestrial body, that's I guess a planet, you could do one of three things. You could either create a planet, which is what I did here. You could create a moon. So if this player, let's say later, got this one here, it would be a level 2. It could be subservient to this one because this one's a level 3. This could be a level 2. This could serve as a moon. Or you could do a collision. If you do a collision, that's one way to grow your planet. So if this level 2 planet collided into a level 3, it would grow. It'd become a level 4. So what you do is you actually just swap those out from the supply. And then this one would go down a level, so a level 2 would become a level 1, and it would serve as a moon. So that's, I guess, a nice thematic representation of a astrological process. But again, if you're versed in science, I think that'll make more sense to you than it did to me when I first started reading the rules. So that is an option. So you could do, like I said, with a planet, you could do any of those things. With a gas giant, you could only create a new planet. So you can only go into these slots here, can't serve as a moon. The exotic objects, it says add to your system. Those do not require a place in orbit. They simply get added to the bottom of your board there. You add some tokens on there so you can spend them later to do extra actions. If you take an asteroid or a comet, like from up here, an asteroid will just get added to your system. A comet you could either add to your system, or you could use it to collide into a planet or a gas planet right away. If it collides into a gas planet, it will generate rings. So this would just flip over and it would have rings, which some of these things, for example this one here, requires that a gas planet would have rings. These will never start with rings. You'll have to collide a comet into it so it could have the rings. Or if it collides into one of these planets, however, what it'll do is it'll flip it over, it'll generate an atmosphere, which will make it capable of supporting life as long as it's in the first 3 rows of your planet. So it won't make life yet, but it'll be capable of supporting life. So that would just flip over like that and then plug in there if you hit it with a comet. The other things that you could take are going to be your planetary objectives and your stellar objectives, which are just simply these things here from the board. And those, the stellar objectives will just slot in here. You'll get 3 of them over the course of the game. They'll score at the end. Planetary objectives will just go into your hand, and you could play them when you meet the requirements. I guess the booby prize is if you are going to take something and you don't like any of the objects, you could always just toss it out of the game and instead just take an asteroid, add that to your planet's field. So that is the other option whenever you're drafting. So then there are this whole slew of additional options that you could do, and you can see here most of them have a cost of either an asteroid or a comet, which is I guess the last thing. So this is the ways that you're going to be able to spend these asteroids that you have in your asteroid field, and you can only do one of these actions on each turn, which makes long-term planning really a requirement if you want to meet a lot of your objectives. So you could create a moon with 1 asteroid, so you simply would slide an asteroid down there and fill in one of those slots, because on this objective here, this doesn't care what's in your first and second slot, but the third one has to be a level 1 planet. I should note that these asteroids here, a level 1 asteroid is the same thing as a level 1 planet for scoring purposes. So this here would meet the requirements, and I hope you could see that well. But you could see here it would be a level 4 planet with an atmosphere with 3 level 1 things. The third one is a level 1 thing. Then on your turn, as a future bonus action, what you could do is spend your action, instead of moving an asteroid, to slide this down here. Again, this will be then eligible for scoring at the end, and you'll get this instant bonus right away. So the other things you could do with an asteroid is colliding. So again, if you collide into an object, so let's say this asteroid collides into this asteroid, that makes the asteroid goes away. The thing that essentially prompted the collision goes down 1 level, so it goes from level 1 to level 0. The thing that you hit goes up 1 level, so that goes from level 1 to level 2. So if you needed a level 2 planet there, that would be one way that you could do it. Next thing is to create a comet. You could spend 2 asteroids from here to turn into a comet. Create life, 1 asteroid. So this planet here does not yet have life. If you hit it with an asteroid, you put one of these markers on the bacterial level of life on here, and I should show you that in detail. So you put it on the bacterial level, And over the course of the game, between rounds, up here, there's going to be a growth period where each round, any of your sliders on these will grow one spot each round. And that's going to give you a scoring at the end of the game for how much life you have on your planets. So, but the way you actually create life, a asteroid has to actually impact your planet that's capable of supporting life. So some of these planets that don't have an atmosphere, for example, this one, it could only hold bacterial life. So if you hit it with a comet, you would put a marker on there, it would have bacterial life, but would not advance without an atmosphere, which again you have to do by having a comet hit it. And it also has to be at least level 3 or level 4. The last thing is the next last thing is to expand your system, which you could see at the start of the game. You have 5 levels of your galaxy. If you want to add another player board here for one asteroid, you could put that up there. You can only get one of those. It'll add, I think, 2 more levels of orbit for your galaxy. And then the other option is to, like I said, collide a comet. I already explained that. And the last object is to reveal an objective. So you just play it from your hand, put it down here, and then you would be able to score that and get an instant bonus. So those are all the actions. It's quite a few actions, I know, but in practice the game plays relatively smoothly because what you're going to be doing each turn is just taking something from that board and then doing only one of those extra actions. It's really, I think, a game that lends itself to a lot of clever manipulation of it, but until you actually sit down and play it and figure out how to get from A to B, it sounds really convoluted. Okay, so sorry for that verbose explanation, but there is a lot going on in this game, as I'm sure you could tell. The funny thing about this game is, despite the fact that it took me 15 minutes to explain the rules for the game, it's actually relatively straightforward once you start playing it. You have a lot of options, but what you're trying to accomplish becomes immediately clear because by the end of the first round, you'll have 2 objectives, one tied to a specific planet, one tied to your solar system at whole, which will really guide your play. So it just becomes a question of how you could use the tools that you have at your advantage to accomplish your goals. So for me, this is an interesting thing because the game requires a lot of upfront explanation, I find, but the actual playing of it is pretty smooth. I am not somebody who's particularly well versed in science, so I found it to be a little bit confusing. Some of the concepts, why things happen, why when a planet is struck by a meteor does it get bigger. That to me was kind of intuitive, but I guess I understand the science behind it. And I think the more that you are predisposed to planetary science and astronomy or astronomy, whatever they call it, the more you will like this game. I'm definitely not the target audience. I'm not somebody who's does planet watching as a hobby, but I can imagine players who do like that really getting a kick out of this game and its mechanisms. And it's something that I think does feel thematic. To me, thematic to a fault, because a lot of those concepts sort of get in the way of me understanding the mechanisms. But if you understand those concepts going into a rules explanation, I think that the game will make a lot more sense. It will feel more intuitive to you. The actual play of the game, once you've mastered the rules and gotten that part of it out of the way, is relatively smooth. It makes a lot of sense, and it's very directed. You're always going to have a sense of what you're trying to accomplish, and the worker placement, I guess, aspect of this, although it's really more of a draft on 4 different fronts each round, it's not really worker placement exactly, because you're only going to be, always doing the same action wherever you go. It's just you have different markets, essentially, that you're going to. That is very competitive. Especially, and sometimes it's competitive not because of other players taking what you want, but sometimes because you could only go to each of those markets once. You can't place twice in the same market, so you're often just blocking yourself if there are 2 great options in this particular territory. You do always have the option, of course, to discard something for an asteroid, which is a particularly useful thing, using those asteroids to change the makeup of a given planet or transform it, or to make it bigger, or to serve as a stopgap moon. There's a lot of uses for those, so that's never a really terrible option. But in the game, you're only getting a certain number of actions, so trying to get all of your things accomplished is really where the pressure of the game comes. Secondarily, it becomes interactive with other players, maybe taking something that they suspect you might want. If for example, you have the comet, each comet's worth 2 points to you at the end of the game. They might take those comets, so you don't have those. So it's I would say more of a solo solitaire game where you're worried about what's on your own board. Secondarily, it's something that you're worried about what the other players are doing. But I suppose there is that element of it in the game. So just to kind of wrap things up, I think that this game looks like a heavy, complex game. It's nothing. It's not like High Frontier or some other like heavy science game. But those elements of the science are in it. They did make it somewhat tricky for me to learn the game. The rule book could probably use another editorial pass. I was able to figure everything out, but at the same time, some of the concepts that aren't clearly labeled. I didn't know what things were based on how they were described in the rulebook until I read through the entire rulebook and retroactively pieced some things together. But again, that might be saying more about my lack of scientific knowledge than the way that the game is presented. So I guess I would say that if you are interested in science, this is going to be a fantastic game, I think, for you. You'll really enjoy it, and it does really play in an hour. It's a medium weight Euro game that I think lives up to that promise. And there are interesting decisions to be made, although generally you're going to be, I think, hamstrung by what is available in the market. So playing with more players gives you more options in the market, but also more competition. I would say generally you'll want to play this more with 4 players or 3 players versus 2 players, where you could only have maybe like 6 planets come out each round. Although there is a finite number of those in the bag, if the wrong ones come out at the wrong time, it could really hamstring you. So it I think is a game that will have a particular audience. It's not exactly my type of game because of the rules explanation that's required, but I certainly could see the appeal of it. So I suppose I'll end there. Those are my thoughts on the game Cosmogenesis, and thank you for watching.